Was prophecy just for prophets? Seriously, did anyone really think it was a parlor trick? Let's dive into a world where dusty scrolls whispered futures and the air crackled with the impossible. It began, predictably, with Augustine. Not the saintly, dove-filled Augustine, but the one wrestling with the sheer weirdness of Scripture. He'd stare at the Psalms, convinced they weren't just songs but coded messages, glimpses into a timeline that stretched far beyond our little lives. He wasn't alone. Centuries earlier, Boethius, trapped in a Roman prison, was obsessed with the idea of fate, a predetermined path, like a river flowing to the sea. He'd scribble frantically about how everything, even our suffering, was part of a grand, unchangeable design. It was a bit bleak, wasn't it? Then came Hugh of St. a monk who basically invented the idea of historical development. Forget neat, linear timelines. Hugh saw history as a spiral, constantly repeating itself, with echoes of the past bouncing off the present. He'd spend days poring over chronicles, looking for patterns like a detective searching for clues in a centuries-old crime scene. He wasn't just recording events, he was trying to understand why they happened, how they connected. And Peter John Olive, this guy was a machine for dissecting Scripture. He'd take a single verse from the Psalms and rip it apart, layer by layer, looking for hidden meanings, like an archaeologist carefully brushing away dirt to reveal a lost artifact. He believed that the Psalms weren't just poetry, they were windows into the divine mind, revealing God's plans for humanity. Now, let's talk about music. Seriously, did you know that medieval scholars believed music held the key to understanding prophecy? They thought certain notes and harmonies corresponded to specific events, like a secret code written in sound. Hugh of St. bless his contemplative soul, dedicated a huge chunk of his life to figuring out this musical language. He believed that God had created the universe according to mathematical proportions, and that music was the key to unlocking those proportions. It was all about finding the right chord to predict the future, but it wasn't all calm contemplation. The 13th century was a messy, chaotic time. The church was embroiled in power struggles, heresies were bubbling up like volcanic mud, and accusations of witchcraft flew like arrows. Bernard Gui, a Dominican inquisitor, was a particularly zealous pursuer of suspected heretics. He'd drag people before the tribunal, demanding they confess their false prophecies and denounce their visions. Nicholas Trevet, a Dominican friar, was a different beast. He was obsessed with the idea of prophecy, not as a tool for condemnation, but as a way to understand God's will. He meticulously documented visions, dreams, and prophecies, trying to discern the signs of the times. He believed that the future was not fixed, but fluid, shaped by human choices. And then there were the humiliati, a group of mystics who claimed to be receiving direct messages from God through visions and ecstatic experiences. They were branded as heretics, accused of blasphemy and witchcraft. The church tried to silence them, but their voices continued to echo through the medieval landscape. The concept of authority was constantly shifting. Was it the Pope, the Church Fathers, the Bible itself? People debated endlessly, each trying to establish their own claim to truth. It was a battleground of ideas where faith and reason clashed, and where the line between genius and madness was often blurred. The idea of time itself was being radically rethought. Hugh of St. argued that time wasn't a straight line but a spiral, constantly returning to the same points. He believed that history was a series of cycles, with patterns repeating themselves throughout the ages. It was a dizzying concept and one that challenged the medieval worldview. And what about those visions? People claimed to see angels, demons, and entire cities floating in the sky. Some were dismissed as the ravings of madmen, while others were revered as saints or prophets. Hildegard of Bingen, a Benedictine abbess, was a particularly prolific visionary. She described elaborate visions in her illuminated manuscripts depicting celestial realms and apocalyptic events. Did anyone really understand it all? Probably not. But the pursuit of prophecy, the desire to glimpse the future, was a driving force in medieval thought. It fueled scholarship, inspired art, and shaped the way people understood their place in the world. It was a world where the boundaries between the sacred and the profane, the real and the imagined, were constantly dissolving, leaving us to wonder, if we could just decipher the whispers of the past, what would the future hold?